In northern Wisconsin, we heat our house with firewood. We have a wood-fired boiler in our basement that warms the water in our hydronic heating system. With turn of the 20th century, state-of-the-art cast iron radiators. As it happens, that's actually a very comfortable heat, and we really weren't sure we were going to like it when we moved into this house 34 years ago, but in the meantime, we've become accustomed to it and actually really have come to love it and would never change it. We're backed up by natural gas fired boiler. Obviously, we would rather not use that. I've had a friend criticize me for cutting down trees to heat my house. That's not very environmentally friendly. And I point out to him, well, the good news is wood is a renewable resource. The natural gas that you use to heat your house will take millions of years to be replaced. Not to mention the fact that it constantly dumps carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, whereas the trees that I burn, the ones that replace them, will absorb the carbon dioxide that I release by burning my wood. So the question then becomes, how is the wood cut and delivered? To this point, it's delivered by a diesel semi truck. Although I'm hoping once the Tesla semi finally gets into production that maybe that'll change. Probably not anytime soon. The other question is, how do I process the wood that we burn in our boiler? Up until this point in time, I've tried a variety of different things. The semi-trailers deliver 10 to 12 full cords of wood in a single load. The logs are cut in 8-foot lengths and can range anywhere from as little as 3 to 4 inches in diameter up to, I've received some that were over 20 inches in diameter. So the first challenge, of course, is sawing them into short enough pieces that will fit in our 36-inch firebox in our boiler. And then something obviously that's as large as 20 inches would also need to be split. As far as the cutting is concerned, I've used a number of different chainsaws over the course of the almost 4 decades that we've lived in this house. My first few were simple consumer quality, bought at a big box store like Menards or Home Depot or something like that. And I quickly learned after the first few years of that was a losing proposition. I would burn through those saws in 3 or 4 years and then they'd be garbage. And then I'd end up having to go and buy a new saw to replace it. So about 7 years ago, I decided it was time to invest in commercial grade equipment that would last longer. The first purchase was actually a Stihl electric chainsaw, plug-in electric. That is nice for the smaller logs. I guarantee you it will draw that 15 amps and sometimes more, especially when you're working on a log that is putting the saw under load and it draws extra power. In that case, it would pop a 15 amp breaker. As it happens, in my garage, I have all 20 amp outlets and 20 amp breakers. On that circuit, it doesn't pop the breaker, but then I run into a new problem. After running that saw for 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes not even that long, especially if I try to cut a larger log, the motor will overheat, and there's a built-in thermal protection system where it pops out a little red button when it overheats so that you don't damage the saw. When that happens, then I have to set the saw down and let it cool for 10 or 15 minutes before I can use it again. The other alternative, I invested in a nice Stihl commercial grade gas chainsaw, and that has the power that I need. Of course, now I'm releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which I'm not hot about, so that's not good. Not to mention the fact that since I started driving my Tesla Model 3, I've gotten so accustomed to not being around equipment that emits exhaust that I've become extremely sensitive to the smell. And if you've ever used a gas chainsaw, it's a 2-cycle engine, which means you add oil to the gas. It stinks. And after an afternoon of cutting firewood with my gas chainsaw, I stink. And not to mention the fact that my nose stinks for the rest of the day. I can't get the smell out of my nose. So when I saw the Greenworks GS181 battery electric, I thought, okay, but is it going to have enough power to do what I want to do? I read a review, and the review that I read said that it's the best battery electric chainsaw he'd ever used. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. And so I read the entire review. He basically compared it to having comparable power to something like the gas chainsaw that I have. And I thought, well, maybe we've finally gotten to the point where the tools have the power. It's an 82 volt system. So it's a high voltage system. And I decided, well, it's time, let's give it a try. The cost of the saw was actually less than my last gas Stihl chainsaw, commercial grade chainsaw. I paid almost $500 for that. This was considerably less. If you've used a battery powered drill or something like that, it's not the tool itself that sets you back, it's the batteries. And that was no different in this case. The GS181, the batteries that it can use, they have a 2 amp hour, a 2.5 amp hour, and a 4 amp hour battery that you can use with this saw. Their recommendation was to use the 2 or 2.5 amp hour because that gives the saw the best balance. Although it will accept the 4 amp hour, but then the saw is going to be unbalanced behind the handle that you hold it with. So I decided to go with the 2.5 amp hour batteries, and that's what you'll see in this video. Okay, so I went out and spent some time with the saw, and here are my impressions. Number one, it feels like a well-made saw. Yes, it has a lot of plastic on it, but that's no different from any other chainsaw that's out there today. Almost all of them have a significant amount of plastic. It has metal where it matters. There's metal in the front where the wood would contact it. There's metal on the bottom where, you know, if you drop the saw and it lands on the bottom, it's going to land on metal instead of landing on plastic. So I like that. It's with the 2.5 amp hour battery, just as they suggested, the balance is exquisite. I can literally hold the saw up with a single finger and it balances almost perfectly. So I would definitely say that that's true. Now, with that said, the 2.5 amp hour batteries, when I was cutting some larger logs, I blew through the entire battery in under 10 minutes. The quick charger that you use to charge it can charge a battery in 30 minutes. I only bought 2 batteries. And so therefore I can do 20 minutes of cutting, and then I've got to wait until the first battery recharges. If you want to go out and spend a couple hours cutting wood, you're not going to do it if you only buy 2 batteries. So that's my first recommendation would be, if you buy this saw, buy extra batteries. Buy as many as you can afford. And that is the catch. Because the batteries, 2 batteries, cost more than the saw. So if you're going to buy, say, 4 batteries, you're basically spending twice the price of the saw just on batteries alone. And then of course you need a charger as well. The chargers aren't too bad. They're like, that was like $50. So that is it. I would absolutely say it has every bit as much power as my Stihl gas chainsaw. It was very impressive. I cut through some very thick logs that the plug-in electric would have absolutely never been able to handle. And even the gas chainsaw would have worked hard to cut through that. So no difference there. I would say that it's just as good as my Stihl gas chainsaw. The controls are very intuitive. If you've ever used a chainsaw, it'll take you all of 30 seconds to figure out how to run this saw. You press the power button to turn it on, then you press in a safety release, and then you pull the trigger, and boom, you're cutting. The chain brake seems to work great. I didn't have it trip on me, but I didn't have any problems with kickback today. It does have a low kickback chain. If you ever use a chainsaw with a low kickback chain, the way that they kind of cheat to do that is they make sure that the teeth don't bite too deeply into the wood by having the chain set up in such a way that there's a depth restrictor that doesn't let the chain sink in any deeper into the wood, and that kind of limits the amount of kickback that you're going to experience. The complication with that is when you have to sharpen the saw, you need to sharpen the teeth, but that makes them shorter, and then consequently those depth restrictors, you have to file those down as well to continue to have the saw biting into the wood enough that you're cutting the wood rather than grinding it. If you can't get the teeth in deep enough, you're basically making very fine sawdust, and what you want to see is wood chips coming out of it. So that's one caution I'd have. Other than that, I love it. I absolutely love it. If I can afford to get a couple more batteries, I'm absolutely going to do that. I might buy 3 more. And probably another charger in that case so that I can keep things going. They did have a 2-bay charger available, but those were on back order. The saw itself, the entire saw and everything that I looked at looks like it is all made in China. So if you were expecting this to be an American made, it doesn't appear that it is. I don't know if that's a strength or a weakness, but what I can say is it's a nice piece of equipment. Don't know where it was designed. I bought it, the place that I bought it from, Greenworks, is in North Carolina, and they shipped it, and it came within about 5 days. Interestingly, they shipped it as 4 separate packages. The saw and the charger came the first day, and the batteries came the next day. So no big deal. I couldn't use it the day I received it, but I could use it by the next day. The tank that holds the bar and chain oil, there's 2 slight criticisms that I have of that. One is the cap, you flip up one side of the cap and that gives you a handle to twist it with. It's plastic and that feels a little weak, fragile. Like if I'm not careful and I turn it too hard, I might break it. That might just be my perception, and it might be a misperception, but that's what it felt like. There is a translucent oil tank that you can see through the side of the saw, the top of the saw actually, but it's hard to gauge how much oil is in there. Other saws that I've had that have this, they usually had a side view of the tank, and you could see all the way down to the bottom of the tank, and they would oftentimes have hash marks on them at like 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 full, so that you could gauge how much oil you had left in the tank. This one, you can see that there's oil in the tank or not, but you can't really gauge how much there is left. Now the fact that I can kill a battery in 10 minutes, I could open it up and look inside then and see how much oil is in there, but that's kind of a pain. You don't want to have to do that. So, like I said, minor criticisms, but worth mentioning. All in all, I would say on a scale of 1 to 5, I would absolutely give this saw a 4.5. I'm only marking it off for that half because of the short battery life. If I buy some of those 4 amp hour batteries, I'm not sure that I'm going to like the way the saw handles, so I may stay with the 2.5 amp hour if I buy more, with the understanding that I'm going to get 10 to 15 minutes of cutting time on that, depending on the wood that I'm cutting. Everything that I cut today was hardwood, oak and maple. If you were cutting, say, pine, I would imagine the batteries would go a lot longer. But when you're cutting a hardwood like oak or maple, it's probably going to go through the battery pretty quick. And the thicker the logs are, the quicker you're going to end up using up the battery. I think that's all I have to say on this. If you're looking for a good battery electric chainsaw to do some work around the yard, if you're a professional landscaper and you want to get away from using 2-cycle engines, I think this is a very valid choice. Especially if you had, for example, a Tesla Cybertruck to plug your chargers to when you're on a job site. Then it would be fantastic. So in conclusion, the Greenworks GS181 is a fantastic piece of equipment, Zach and Jesse, and now you know.